The rain poured relentlessly over the streets of Lagos, hammering on tin roofs and turning the dusty ground into thick, sticky mud. The city, usually loud with shouting traders, blaring horns, and hurried footsteps, moved more quietly now. People rushed for shelter beneath market stalls, faded shop fronts, and the nearest scraps of cover they could find. Beneath one such stall, crouched under the fragile shade of a street vendor's worn, flapping umbrella, sat 12-year-old Emeka. His bare feet were cold and caked with grime. His thin, threadbare shirt soaked through and clinging tightly to his shivering frame. In his trembling hands, he held his last piece of bread stale, hard at the edges, already softening from the damp air. He hadn't eaten all day. His stomach twisted in painful, empty knots, but his grip on the bread was loose, as though something deep within him knew this small piece was not meant to be clung to so tightly. Asterisk, just across from him, no more than a few steps away, sat another boy smaller, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The child's body trembled with cold and fear, his knees scraped and raw, his dirty shirt clinging to his thin shoulders. His sobs were quiet but piercing, each one escaping from him in ragged bursts, as though he had tried to hold them in but failed. His hunger wasn't just visible, it was alive in the sharp, desperate sounds that slipped past his lips. The passers-by did not stop. Their faces were turned away, eyes hardened by their own worries, their own need to make it through the day. Asterisk, but Emeka saw him. Asterisk, without speaking, Emeka broke his bread in half. His fingers lingered over his own portion for a moment, his stomach roaring in protest, but then he reached out and offered the other half to the boy. The child hesitated, wide-eyed, as though such kindness could not possibly be meant for him. Slowly, uncertainly, he reached out and took it, holding it carefully in both hands as though it might be snatched away at any moment. They sat together, under the umbrella, chewing quietly, sharing the small comfort of a meal and the even rarer comfort of company. The rain continued to fall around them, washing the streets, pooling in the gutters. But for a brief moment, the cold and the hunger seemed a little smaller. Asterisk, not far from them, a black car idled at the curb. Behind the wheel, a man sat watching. He had seen it, all the hesitation, the quiet offering, the unspoken bond that formed in a heartbeat between two boys with nothing. In a city like Lagos, where life was often a brutal fight for survival, such an act stood out. It stayed with him. Something about the boy's instinct to give, to share even in his own suffering, caught at something in the man's memory, something he couldn't quite name. He watched Emeka for a moment longer, his eyes thoughtful, before slowly driving away. But his mind lingered on the boy beneath the umbrella. Asterisk, Emeka, unaware of the watching man, finished the last bite of his bread and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. The rain still fell in heavy sheets, but beside the younger boy, he felt a quiet warmth rising in his chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Asterisk, what he could not know was that this simple act, this small, almost forgotten moment on a rainy street would ripple through his life in ways he could never have imagined. In a city that often forgot, boys like him, Emeka, had just been remembered. Asterisk, Emeka didn't remember much of his life before the fire. He was 5 when it happened, too young to hold onto the details, but old enough for the smell of smoke to haunt him long after the flames had died. His parents, his home, his sense of safety all gone in a single night. The neighbors who once smiled at his mother's singing, who patted his head when he ran past their doors, disappeared just as quickly. No one wanted a quiet, wide-eyed, orphan boy who had nothing but ashes clinging to his skin. So Emeka did what many forgotten children in Lagos did. He vanished into the streets. The years that followed blurred together in a rhythm of survival. Each morning brought the same question: where would he find his next meal? He scavenged through piles of discarded food, begged on street corners, slept under broken-down buses and crumbling stairwells. Kindness was rare and short-lived. Trust was dangerous. Yet somewhere in those lonely days, Emeka met Chuka, the boy he had once shared his last piece of bread with on that rainy night. Chuka became more than a friend. He was a brother, a partner in the long, tireless hunt for scraps. They stole together, laughed together, and learned the sharp edges of the city side by side. But the streets have a way of pulling people into darker places. As they grew older, Chuka drifted toward a dangerous crowd, boys who promised protection, fast money, and power in exchange for loyalty. Emeka begged him to leave it behind, to stay with him, but Chuka only smiled that crooked, distant smile and said, "This is the only way we win." One day, Chuka disappeared into the maze of Lagos, swallowed by a life Emeka refused to follow. Emeka waited for him to return. He never did. Years passed, and Emeka's hunger shifted from survival to something else: acquired, stubborn dream. At 25, he worked as a baker in a small, cramped shop tucked between two warehouses. The walls were stained with years of flour and grease, the ovens temperamental, the pay just enough to keep him afloat. His boss, Mr. Benson, ran the bakery with an iron fist. He barked orders, overworked Emeka without gratitude, and pocketed the credit for Emeka's best recipes. "You're nothing but a street rat," Benson would sneer when Emeka dared to question him. "Be grateful I even let you through that door." Emeka learned to swallow his anger, to keep his head down, to keep shaping dough with his calloused hands while his heart burned quietly inside his chest. What kept him moving was a vision that had rooted itself in him years ago. As a starving child beneath a street vendor's umbrella, to one day open his own bakery, a place where children like Chuka would, never have to beg for bread. A place where there would always be something warm waiting, no questions asked. But dreams were heavy things when your pockets were empty. Emeka had no family, no savings, no connections. Every naira he earned barely stretched to cover rent and the simple meals he allowed himself. Yet not everyone in his life was cruel. Ada, a kind-hearted waitress who worked at the cafe down the street, had become his friend, his quiet supporter. She saw the way his face lit up when he spoke about baking, the way his hands came alive when he described new recipes. She often stayed late after her shift to sit with him on the curb, sharing roasted corn and stories of impossible futures. "You're wasting your talent with Benson," she would tell him, her voice soft but firm. "You could be so much more." Emeka always shook his head, weighed down by the fear that leaving Benson would only lead him back to the streets. One morning, driven by a mixture of frustration and hope, Emeka stayed late after closing to perfect a new bread recipe, one with soft, sweet centers and a crisp, golden crust, unlike anything Benson's bakery had ever sold. He presented it to Benson the next day, his voice careful but trembling with excitement. For once, Benson actually listened. He chewed slowly, nodded thoughtfully, and tapped his chin in false consideration. "If this sells," Benson said at last, "I'll give you a promotion. Full baker's pay, maybe even your name on the recipe." Emeka wanted to believe him. He wanted to believe that this could finally be his break, that his hard work and quiet loyalty would amount to something. Ada warned him not to trust Benson's promises, but Emeka clung to hope, just as he always had. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this would be the start of something real. What Emeka didn't know was that Benson had no intention of keeping his word. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the cramped bakery, but Emeka no longer felt the pride he once did. His new recipe, his best work, the bread he'd poured his heart into had become the shop's bestseller overnight. Customers lined up each morning, asking for it by name, their voices full of praise. But the name they asked for wasn't his. It was Benson's. Emeka first heard the news from a delivery driver. Mr. Benson had signed a major contract with a popular supermarket chain to supply thousands of loaves each week. It was a deal big enough to transform the struggling bakery into a thriving business, and it had been secured entirely because of Emeka's bread. When Emeka confronted Mr. Benson, a sick feeling already twisting in his gut, Benson laughed a sharp, bitter sound that filled the flour-dusted air. "You thought I'd promote you?" Benson sneered, his lips curling into a smirk. "You're just a street boy. I own everything in this shop, including your little recipe. You've got no papers, no claim, you're nothing." He handed Emeka a brown envelope with a few crumpled Naira notes, inside barely enough for bus fare. "Don't come back." It wasn't just the loss of his job. It was the theft of the one thing he had built with his own hands, the one thing that was supposed to be his. Emeka stood frozen outside the bakery, the sounds of the city blurring around him, the weight of the betrayal pressing against his ribs. For years, he had worked himself to the bone for Benson. He had accepted the insults, the long hours, the stolen credit. But this was a final blow. When Ada found him later that evening, sitting alone outside their usual cafe, his shoulders slumped and his eyes hollow, her heart broke. She sat beside him, her voice firm but gentle. "You have to fight back," she said. "You can't let him get away with this." But Emeka shook his head. He didn't know how to fight men like Benson, men with money, with lawyers, with power. He had no family name, no contracts, no proof. All he had was a street boy's story and in Lagos that wasn't worth much. Even so, Ada wouldn't let it go. She helped him draft a letter to the supermarket, requesting a meeting, begging them to hear his side. They ignored him. When he showed up at their office, the receptionist barely looked up. "The contract is signed," she said curtly. "We don't deal with individuals. Speak to your employer." She handed back his letter without a second glance. Defeated. Emeka wandered the streets for hours, replaying every step that had led him here. The city moved around him, uncaring and busy as always, but he felt suddenly outside of it, as if the world had continued on and quietly left him behind. He found himself at the edge of the marketplace where, years ago, he had once sat under a street vendor's umbrella and shared his last piece of bread with a crying boy. He could still feel the rain in his memory, still see Chuka's small, grateful hands clutching that soggy piece of bread. It felt like a lifetime ago. Just as he was about to turn away and retreat into the loneliness that had always waited for him, a voice called out, "Emeka." He turned to see a man approaching, older, tall, dressed in a crisp grey suit that seemed out of place in the dusty street. The man's gait was steady, his expression warm but serious. He stopped in front of Emeka and studied him for a long moment. "I've been looking for you," confused and wary, Emeka stepped back. Do I know you? Asterisk. The man smiled, just slightly. Not yet. But I know you. I saw you once, a long time ago. A boy sitting in the rain, giving away his last piece of bread when he had nothing himself. I never forgot that. Asterisk. Emeka's breath caught in his throat. A memory stirred the man in the black car all those years ago, the one who had watched him but never spoken. That was you. Asterisk. The man nodded. My name is Mr. Kalu. He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. I've followed your life from a distance. I always wondered what became of that boy. I see now that the world has not been kind to you. Emeka lowered his eyes, unsure what to say. Mr. Kalu continued, his voice calm but firm. I can't erase what's been taken from you, but I can offer you something a start. It's not much, but I have a small, abandoned shop in Ajagunal. I'll loan it to you, along with a little money to get going. I've watched you long, enough to know you won't waste it. Asterisk. For the first time in days, Emeka felt something flicker in his chest. Hope. Asterisk. Mr. Kalu's words lingered. You gave what little you had to someone else. Now let's see what happens when someone gives. To you? Asterisk. The shop Mr. Kalu provided was little more than 4 crumbling walls and a rusted shutter that groaned when it opened. The floor was cracked, the oven ancient, and the windows so clouded with grime they barely let in the sun. Still, to Emeka, it was more than a building, it was a chance. He poured himself into the work, scrubbing the walls, repairing what he could, and crafting his first loaves with flour bought from the cheapest supplier he could find. Ada stood by him every step of the way, helping him paint the crooked sign that read Emeka's Bread and handing out flyers on street corners. They laughed through exhaustion, holding on to the fragile excitement of building something of their own. Asterisk. But it didn't take long for reality to weigh on them. Days passed with only a handful of customers trickling in. Emeka's bread was good, soft, flavorful, unlike the mass-produced loaves flooding the city, but no one knew his name. The bakery sat on a dusty roadside, far from the busy markets, and people were slow to trust a new face, especially one without money, status, or reputation. The little earnings he made barely covered ingredients, and his rent to Mr. Kalu, though modest, loomed each month like a quiet threat. Asterisk. Just when Emeka thought things couldn't get worse, Benson struck. The sabotage came swiftly. Suppliers who once sold to Emeka began turning him away, claiming they couldn't risk losing their relationship with Benson's bakery, which was now expanding rapidly thanks to the supermarket deal. False rumors spread through the neighborhood, whispers that Emeka used spoiled flour, that his bread made people sick, that he stole from his old employer. Deliveries went missing. Flour prices suddenly tripled for him. Benson was cutting off his legs piece by piece, and Emeka could feel himself slipping. Asterisk. Each day, Emeka woke with a little less hope. His hands still shaped the dough, but his heart hardened. He began to wonder if Ada had been wrong about him. Maybe he wasn't strong enough to fight back. Maybe Benson was right. Maybe kindness was weakness, and all it ever did was leave you hungry. Asterisk. The bitterness gnawed at him like a second hunger. He stopped offering Ada the small smiles he used to. He stopped sitting with the street kids who watched him knead dough through the window. The bakery, once his flicker of a dream, began to feel like a cage. Asterisk. And then, one evening, Chuka returned. Asterisk. Emeka recognized him instantly, though the boy he once knew was gone. Chuka's shoulders were broader now, his eyes sharper, his smile colder. His clean, expensive shirt and polished shoes told Amika everything he needed to know. Chuka had made it, but not the way Amika had hoped. Long time, brother, Chuka said, his voice steady but without warmth. Amika stepped into the doorway, unsure whether to embrace him or brace for a blow. Chuka, where have you been? Where I had to be, Chuka answered flatly. Benson's people took me in when you wouldn't. You chose to starve. I chose to eat. There was no anger in his voice, only something worse, disappointment, as though Emeka had failed some unspoken test of survival. They sat outside the shop, the silence between them heavy with years of distance. Chuka eventually leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm here on Benson's orders. He wants you. Out, says you've become a nuisance. Emeka's stomach twisted. You're working for him now. I work for the man who pays me. Chuka's gaze flickered to the fading sign above the door. I came because I wanted to give you an option. Come back. Work under Benson again. He says he'll find you a place in the factory. No more small ovens. No more struggling. Amika almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. So I can watch him sell my bread under his name. No, you're still clinging to pride. Chuka's voice sharpened. You think the world rewards pride. I'm not here to debate you. If you don't step down, Benson will crush you. He's already started. Emeka's hands tightened into fists. For a heartbeat, he was tempted. Tempted by the safety of giving up, of folding into the system that had always seemed bigger than him. But something inside him, small but stubborn, refused to move. I'm not going back, he said quietly. Disgust flickered across Chuka's face. Then don't expect mercy. With that. Chuka stood and left, his footsteps slow but deliberate, like a man who had already buried what little remained of his childhood. That night, Emeka sat alone in the bakery, his dough left unshaped on the table, his heart heavy. The walls felt smaller. The dream felt foolish. When Mr. Kalu visited, Emeka told him everything about Chuka, about Benson's threats, about his doubts. Mr. Kalu listened without interruption, then offered calm, measured advice. He explained that Amika still had a legal path along, difficult road, but not an impossible one. He could challenge Benson's theft, especially if he could prove the recipe was his original creation. Mr. Kalu even offered to connect him with a lawyer willing to take the case, but the process would be slow, and Benson's wealth and influence would make every step harder. Do you want to fight him in the courts? Mr. Kalu asked. Emeka stared at his hands, hands that had shaped every loaf, hands Benson could never steal. I don't know if I can wait that long. Ada, who had overheard the conversation, stepped forward and gently touched his shoulder. Then don't wait. Benson can take your recipe, your suppliers, your money, but he can't take your hands. He can't take the way you make people feel when you hand them bread. Her words lingered in Emeka's mind that night. The next morning, he rose before dawn and began baking as he always had. But this time, he baked not for profit, but for the street kids who lined the market alleys, barefoot and hungry, just like he once was. He handed out loaves for free, smiling as he pressed the warm bread into their small, surprised hands. Word spread quickly. Videos captured by passers-by began circulating online, clips of Amika kneeling to tie a child's shoe, of him laughing as he handed out fresh loaves to a crowd of wide-eyed kids. People began to notice. Within days, customers started arriving, not just to buy his bread, but to meet the man who gave without expecting anything in return. His small roadside bakery, once almost empty, now bustled with life. Volunteers arrived to help. Orders came in faster than he could bake. Marcus' story, carried by the city's curious hearts, had spread farther than Benson's lies ever could. The battle wasn't over. The legal fight still loomed. Benson still held power, but for the first time. Emeka was no longer alone, and neither was his dream. The tide began to turn faster than Emeka had ever dared to hope. What started as quiet murmurs on social media swelled into public outrage. Videos of Emeka handing out free bread to street kids continued to spread, his story picked up by local bloggers, radio stations, and eventually national news. People demanded answers. How could a man like Mr. Benson, who paraded as a community leader, be accused of stealing from the very street boy he once discarded? The supermarket chain, fearing the weight of public backlash, abruptly cut ties with Benson's bakery, severing the contract that had built his growing empire. The blow was immediate and devastating. Without the supermarket's orders, Benson's finances wobbled. Suppliers withdrew their support, eager to protect their own reputations. Former employees began to speak out about the years of mistreatment and exploitation. What had once seemed like an unstoppable business began to crumble at the edges. Still, Benson fought viciously. He denied every accusation, spinning new lies, pushing back with the full force of his influence. He thought he could wait out the storm. But then Chuka reappeared, this time not as Benson's enforcer, but as the crack in his armor. Chuka came to Emeka one evening, his face drawn and tired, as if the weight of all his choices had finally settled on his shoulders. He no longer wore the sharp clothes Benson had bought him. His voice was quieter, less sure. I was a pawn, Chuka admitted, sitting across from Emeka in the now bustling bakery. Benson used me like he used everyone. When I asked for a share, for something of my own, he pushed me aside like trash. Emeka watched him carefully. He still bore the sting of Chuka's earlier betrayal. But something in his old friend's eyes told him the fight was no longer between them. I have documents, Chuka said, pulling a worn envelope from his pocket. Emails, recipe drafts, even your original notes. Benson kept everything, thinking no one would ever touch him. I can help you win this. Why now? Emeka asked, unsure whether to trust him. Chuka lowered his gaze. Because I finally understand what you were trying to do back then. You chose to starve, not because you were weak, but because you wanted to be something better. I didn't see it until now. Emeka felt a surge of conflicting emotions, gratitude, sadness, and a lingering ache for the boyhood friendship they had both abandoned on different streets. Slowly, he nodded. Thank you. With Chuka's evidence and Mr. Kalu's legal guidance, Emeka filed a lawsuit that demanded not just recognition, but justice. The battle moved into the courtroom, where the final confrontation would unfold. The day of the hearing, Emeka faced Benson across the polished wooden tables. Benson's smirk hadn't faded. His suit was immaculate, his voice steady, but his empire was already in ruins. The supermarket had abandoned him, his remaining bakeries struggled, and the walls around him had begun to close in. You've made quite the spectacle, Benson sneered, leaning forward, his voice low but sharp. You think the crowd outside loves you. They'll forget you as quickly as they found you. You think this matters. Emeka's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. You can steal my recipe. You can lie about me. But you can't steal what I've built with these hands. You can't steal people's respect. You can't steal the way I made them feel. Benson scoffed. Respect doesn't keep you in business. Kindness doesn't pay your bills. Emeka met his gaze, his voice firm. Maybe not at first, but it's why I'm still standing. And it's why you're not. The evidence Chuka provided was undeniable. Emails showed Benson's direct theft of Emeka's recipe and his attempts to block Emeka from suppliers. Witnesses came forward, former co-workers, even suppliers who admitted they had been pressured into cutting ties with Emeka. The judge's decision was clear and final. The recipe belonged to Emeka. The court awarded him damages and stripped Benson of the rights to produce or sell the bread that had built his short-lived empire. The supermarket publicly apologized and offered Emeka a new contract, this time under his own name, on his own terms. Benson, once untouchable, was ordered to close his flagship bakery. His name, once associated with success, became a cautionary tale. When the verdict was announced, Emeka sat in stunned silence as the weight of years finally began to lift from his shoulders. Ada squeezed his hand tightly, tears shining in her eyes. Chuka, sitting at the back of the courtroom, offered a small, quiet nod before slipping out, perhaps seeking his own path to redemption. Outside, a crowd had gathered, friends, loyal customers, street vendors, and the very children who now proudly called Emeka's bakery their own. When Emeka stepped onto the courthouse steps, the cheers that rose around him were not for the bread he had created, but for the man he had chosen to become. And in that moment, he realized that kindness had always paid it, just needed time to rise. The settlement money opened doors Emeka had once only dreamed of. With it, he expanded his modest roadside bakery into something far bigger, growing. Chain of small bakeries scattered across Lagos, each one carrying his name, each one built on the same foundation of kindness that had carried him through his darkest days. But Emeka's dream had never been about wealth. He made sure every branch of his bakery had a corner dedicated to street kids, a place where they could always find a warm loaf, a seat, and someone who remembered what it felt like to be invisible. More than just offering free bread, Emeka began to train these kids. He hired them, taught them to knead dough, to wake before the sunrise, to build something with their own hands. Many of them arrived suspicious, hardened by years on the streets. But Emeka understood their silence, their rough edges. He had lived them. Slowly, they began to trust him. He watched boys and girls who once scavenged for scraps, now standing proudly behind counters, wearing aprons with his bakery's logo stitched across their chests. The bakery became more than a business, it became a refuge. Parents came not just for the bread, but to tell their children stories of the man who had nothing and still chose to give. Emeka became a symbol in the community, not because he sought attention, but because people recognized the quiet strength of someone who had risen without stepping on others. Chuka lingered on the edges of this new world, uncertain if he belonged. After the court case, he disappeared for a time, ashamed of the choices he had made and the part he had played in nearly destroying Emeka's dream. Though he'd provided the evidence that turned the tide, he struggled to believe he was worthy of forgiveness. One day, he approached Emeka's flagship bakery, standing awkwardly by the delivery trucks, unsure if he would be welcomed. Asterisk, when Emeka spotted him, there was no hesitation. He walked straight to Chuka and handed him a delivery uniform. Asterisk, I need someone reliable, Emeka said, his voice calm but warm. You know the streets. You know the people. The job's yours if you want it. Asterisk Chuka stared at the uniform, his throat tightening, years of guilt rising all at once. After everything I did, you'd still trust me. Asterisk Emeka shrugged with a small, knowing smile. We both survived the streets. We just took different roads to get here. I'm not offering you a second chance because you earned it. I'm offering it because we all needed someone to give us one. Asterisk, it wasn't easy for Chuka to accept, but he did. Slowly, he began working in the delivery team, finding quiet purpose in the simple act of moving bread from oven to shelf, from shop to hungry hands. It wasn't the life he once chased, but perhaps it was the life he needed. Asterisk Ada remained by Emeka's side through it all. Together, they built not just a business, but a home. The long hours of baking, the shared frustrations, and the small victories wove them closer until the lines between friendship and something deeper gently blurred, where Emeka once stood alone. In the rain, Ada now stood with him, and their bakery pulsed with the life of a growing family. Street kids turned bakers, delivery drivers, shopkeepers, and dreamers, all bound together by the bread that had once been Emeka's last possession. Asterisk, though wealth came, Emeka never chased it. His joy came from the faces of children biting into warm loaves, from the laughter echoing in his shops, from knowing he had rewritten his story on his own terms. He was no longer the barefoot boy shivering. Under the rain, he was a man who had built something that could not be stolen, a man whose hands calloused steady and proud had shaped not just bread, but a legacy. Asterisk, in the end, Emeka understood what his journey had always been about. Kindness, like bread, takes time to rise, but once it does, it feeds more than hunger, it feeds hope. Asterisk, years later, on a quiet, rainy evening, Emeka stood by the window of his now thriving bakery, watching the streets shimmer under the soft drizzle. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the warm air as laughter and clinking cups echoed inside. Through the rain-speckled glass, something caught his eye. Small figure huddled beneath a tree across the street. Barefoot, soaked, clutching a piece of stale bread as if it were his last treasure. The sight pulled at something deep within Emeka, a memory buried but never forgotten. He grabbed an extra loaf from the counter, still warm from the oven, and stepped out into the rain without a second thought. Though wealth came, Emeka never chased it. His joy came from the faces of children biting into warm loaves, from the laughter echoing in his shops, from knowing he had rewritten his story on his own terms. He was no longer the barefoot boy shivering. Under the rain, he was a man who had built something that could not be stolen. A man whose hands calloused, steady and proud had shaped not just bread, but a legacy or asterisk in the end. Emeka understood what his journey had always been about. Kindness, like bread, takes time to rise, but once it does, it feeds more than hunger, it feeds hope. Asterisk, years later. On a quiet, rainy evening, Emeka stood by the window of his now thriving bakery, watching the streets shimmer under the soft drizzle. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the warm air as laughter and clinking cups echoed inside. Through the rain-speckled glass, something caught his eye. Small figure huddled beneath a tree across the street. Barefoot, soaked, clutching a piece of stale bread as if it were his last treasure. The sight pulled at something deep within. Emeka, a memory buried but never forgotten. He grabbed an extra loaf from the counter, still warm from the oven, and stepped out into the rain without a second thought. The boy flinched as Emeka approached, his eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from being invisible too long. Emeka knelt beside him, holding out the fresh loaf without a word. Slowly, the boy reached for it, his trembling hands betraying how long it had been since he'd eaten something warm. Emeka sat down beside him in the wet earth, just as he had once sat with Chuka under that old street vendor's umbrella so many years ago. They ate together in silence. The rain falling steadily around them, the world momentarily paused. When the boy finally looked up, Emeka smiled gently and said, "Come inside. There's always room here for someone like you." He led the boy into the glowing warmth of the bakery, past shelves stacked high with bread, past the humming ovens where street kids, now bakers, worked with steady hands and easy laughter. The boy's wide eyes took in the scene, not yet understanding that his life had just shifted, that someone had seen him. As Emeka settled him at a table and handed him a second loaf, the memory of that rainy night when he first gave away his last piece of bread settled over him like an old, familiar coat. Sometimes all it takes is one piece of bread to change your life.